So one of the most important tools in a dancer's book is their pointe shoe, and having the right pointe shoe is essential for dance. So one of the major differences is the differences between brands. Different dance teachers like different brands, but it all depends on the dancer's feet as to which brand you get. And so first let's look at the Capezios. Capezios tend to be a wide, stable box, rather bendable.
They're softer in the box. You can get a harder box like Block, or you could get a softer box like Capezio.
One of the other brands is the Russian Pointe. And the Russian Pointe, literally, it comes from Russia. And so as a result, it's a very different style from the American-made pointe shoes. They have a much more defined tip of the box, and it's a narrower toe, but it has the box. The wings come out farther and go longer, especially for bunions, so that they encase them instead of making them worse. The Russian Pointe also has a much different shape. It's very much thicker and harder to break.
Russian pointe shoes were made so that Russian dancers, or specifically Russian dancers, since that's a huge part of their culture in Russia is ballet, it's for harder to break the box, since like during a performance they last longer.
And this goes back to the history too, because Russians were the first to really stiffen up the sole of the shoe, that way they could go up on pointe. Mm-hmm. And so that's why the Russians generally and the Russian Pointe has a much thicker sole than, say, the Capezio or the Block. So the Block pointe shoes
are definitely wider. These are a new pair, and they have a harder box, but the shank comes down lower, so it's easier to break, unlike the Russian. And the box also comes down lower. And as you can see by these, the box is very low on these. Like, this is where the fabric is, and then this is where the wood is. Only about 2 inches. But those are a really, really broken pair of pointe shoes, and we'll talk about that later.
The last brand we have here is an example, and there are other brands that we don't have with us. But the last brand we have is the Gamba.
Gambas are European. They have a much taller box compared to the Block. These are both broken pairs of pointe shoes. And so they're for people with bigger toes.
Yeah.
Just taller toes, longer toes.
If you have longer toes, or if you have just the area that needs to be encased in general is longer than other people's, a lot of times these will be better because the box comes up farther, so it correctly encases your foot, lowering the risk of injury.
And it, like the Capezios, it also has a very soft box. It's not very thick at all.
So the next difference between pointe shoes is the make and the model of them. The examples we have here with us are from the Block.
So in the Block, we have the Serenade, the Aspiration, and the Balance European. And
difference between the makes and the models is that on each pointe shoe, there is, especially in the block, not so much on the Capezio, but they have this number, the 6, is the size of the shoe. Right here you see is the M. The medium means how wide your foot is. And the XX that you see right here is called the maker. So each maker has their own symbol, and whenever they make these shoes, they put their symbol on here. And so many dancers, especially professional dancers, have a specific maker that they go to get their shoes done, because each maker does it differently. And going back to the difference between models is that, as you can see, like the aspirations have a very low box, and the Serenade have a very tall box, well, taller box in comparison. There's also differences between how thick and how fast your shank can be broken.
Also, how wide the ball of your shank is. For example, these are much wider and more square than these ones are.
You can also see the differences in the point of the toe. So different pointe shoes will have different things. So you see how it gets really wide right here, but then it goes really skinny. And between, these are all block, but they're completely different pointe shoes. Another thing is that whenever you first get your pointe shoes, there is no difference between them. They're the same shoe, basically. And so whenever a ballerina gets the pointe shoes, you have to break them in left and right. So you put an L or an R on the pointe shoe.
So the very first thing you do when you sew your pointe shoes is you fit the ribbons to the specific foot and mark the shoe. If you don't, then
it hurts.
Yeah.
And so after you do that, then you start breaking in your shoe. And it's done that way because your left and your right foot, well, first of all, they're completely opposites. And second of all, your feet, one foot may be bigger and one foot may be narrower, one foot may be, like, there's different things. And so they get fit. So as you wear them, the shoe becomes fit to your foot. And so that's a major thing.
That's why you hear people say, never put on another person's pair of pointe shoes, because they're a mold of your foot and your foot only.
Literally, as you wear them, the sweat literally molds the shoe to your foot so that it fits you better and it supports you the way you need to be supported. And then once it breaks you, you need a new pair of pointe shoes. And toe shoes are like cars in that way. They're very much, you get a new pair of pointe shoes as you need a new pair of pointe shoes. You figure out the pair that's the best for you and you get new pairs like that. But they're also like cars, as in the brands every year to come out with a new type of, like a new line of pointe shoes. So this goes back to the models where we were talking about the Serenades versus the Aspirations versus the European Balance. And all three of them are different, but they're like different car models. There's a new line each year. And there's different types within that line, but they're completely different lines.
Like, it's kind of like cars have different features. Every car has a different feature, even if it's the same model or brand. And so do pointe shoes, whether it be a thicker shank or a wider box.
And the pointe shoes can be customized. So there's like wider pointe shoes, there's narrower pointe shoes. You can get double shank if you break through your shank really quickly. There are different things that you can do that a dancer does to personalize and get the best shoe for her.
Or they could, I've seen this done with, on videos with professional dancers. They'll fold this back and they'll take it, this is mostly professional dancers since they have a much higher arch. They'll take the fabric off and they will shave down the shank to make it less of a shank, but a thicker one.
And the last thing is that all toe shoes have a life cycle. They all have you get them and they look brand new like these, no left, no right. Then you sew them in, and that's another thing is that each dancer kind of has their own way of sewing in their pointe shoes. So whereas I have my ribbon sewn and then I have just a loop of elastic in the back, Abby has hers and she has an entire loop of elastic that goes around her foot, whereas mine just holds the ribbon in place. And so after you sew on those, then you start to wear them and you start to break them in, which is where pointe shoes like these come in, like the ones that we're currently wearing, where they're just starting to get worn, but we've broken them in and they fit our foot.
So these two pairs are the same exact pair, but these ones are newer, about maybe a month old, and these ones are 4 to 6 months old.
And you can see the construction of the pointe shoe because you can see how as the shoe wears out, the canvas or the satin on the outside starts to wear down and it shows the canvas that's underneath. And then finally, there's different ways to break your toe shoes. One of the main ways is that you can just wear them out, where the satin's worn out, they don't support your foot right anymore, that kind of thing. The other way is that you can literally
really wear down the box.
Yeah.
Or, for example,
break your shank.
If
it does that, it is not good.
These are very broken shanks.
These are brand new shanks where you can't hardly bend them a whole lot. And so that's the life cycle of pointe shoe. And after it breaks, you get a new pair and you start all over again.